E3 2019 is now less than a week away, and it's gonna all kick off, as it always does, as it usually does, with the Microsoft press conference. And this year, that particular conference is going to be bigger than it ever has been before, presumably because not only are there likely to be some hints towards the next generation of consoles, but it's also going to be huge because Sony is not at E3 this year, and of course that's a huge omission because typically it's Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo that are the big players at E3, along with the third parties of course. But with Sony now taken out of that equation, there is now one less place that a lot of the third parties kind of flock to show off their games. Because typically, you know, the likes of Activision, Capcom, Square Enix, etc., they often fill out a lot of Sony's press conference as well, along with their usual first party titles. But now that Sony isn't an option for those third parties to show off any announcements they may have, a lot of them are naturally going to flock to Microsoft. So for those reasons, I think it's pretty clear at this point that the Xbox conference, even though I personally don't even own an Xbox, is the conference to be excited for this year. So with that in mind, I wanted to discuss my predictions for what's going to go down in a bit less than a week's time with 10 Xbox E3 2019 predictions. Now, a lot of these predictions could be relatively safe because there are kind of a lot of no-brainer options to choose from. So quickly, before we get into my actual proper 10 predictions, I wanted to just mention some of the obvious stuff that I predict that's going to happen. Halo Infinite will naturally be there. We haven't seen it since last year, and it will probably get a release window or date of some sort. Once again, the same thing applies to Gears of War 5. And following the release pattern of a mainline Forza game releasing every 2 years, and the last one, Forza Motorsport 7, releasing in 2017, we are due for a new Forza game, so there will likely, I guess, be a Forza 8 reveal here. I can't say I'm a Forza expert, but I guess that makes sense. And we'll also finally probably get an Ori and the Will of the Wisps release date, which we have not yet had a concrete confirmation of to my knowledge. Alright, here we go, 10 predictions for Microsoft's conference. Please feel free to leave any predictions you may have for the conference in the comments below. My first prediction is that we are going to get rough details surrounding the next Xbox, whether it's called the Xbox 2, just the next generation of Xbox hardware. And I think we're going to get rough information about it in the same way they kind of revealed the Xbox One X back at E3 of 2016, where if you don't remember, they had the code name calling it Scorpio, and there were some developer interviews and they were talking about its potential and things like that. But we didn't get a full title, we didn't get a price and a date or anything like that. So I think this is going to be a similar kind of scenario where we hear some preliminary details, we might even see some in-engine footage, or perhaps some games like Halo Infinite are running on next-gen hardware or things like that. But I don't think we're going to get a name, price, or date. I do have to say though, this is for me the prediction I'm the least confident in. I could absolutely see Microsoft going all out, revealing the console, showing absolutely everything about it, and giving it a date for the end of the year to get 1 year ahead fully of Sony's PS5, by it being a 2019 launch. I think that's definitely possible. I think they're absolutely going to touch on it no matter what, but I'm skeptical towards that idea that there will be full announcement details. However, something I do think they're going to discuss extensively in relation to next gen, and it's my second prediction, it's their streaming plans. We know that Microsoft has got Project xCloud, which is kind of their streaming service thing that they've been testing. I guess is somewhat akin to Google Stadia and maybe even PS Now and things like that. And Microsoft, as of late, definitely seems to be going heavily into a service kind of direction, because that seems to be how they view the future of video games, because we see it now with the Xbox Game Pass, which I think is a really cool thing, and I think it was absolutely intended to be a first step into that kind of service-based stuff that I think next gen, with some of their streaming plans, they're going to be dealing with heavily. I do think what we'll get is potentially a name for whatever their streaming service ends up being called, and I think we'll get information regarding exactly how it will be implemented into the next gen hardware. And there might even be some demonstrations about how it practically works and things like that. Now, the reason I'm more confident in them showing their streaming side of things and that strategy as opposed to just the full next gen box is because of a leaked email that was sent out after the Google Stadia reveal from Phil Spencer. And in that email, he said, I believe the Google Stadia announcement that had just happened at the time gave them confidence in their direction at E3. Now, that specific wording absolutely makes it sound like whatever they have planned for E3 is a direct challenge to Stadia, of course indicating that it would have to be some kind of streaming capabilities for Xbox. But between the streaming stuff and obviously the possibility of next gen on the horizon, it's really going to be a super awesome E3 for Microsoft from a console and services perspective. But enough of that, let's get into the games. My third prediction is a Fable 4 full reveal. It was confirmed at last year's E3 that Playground Games, that was recently acquired by Microsoft, is working on an open world game, and it was then even rumoured before that confirmation that they were working on the next iteration of Fable, so I think it only makes sense that here we get the full blowout of details surrounding Fable 4. Whether or not it ends up being called Fable 4, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's Fable 4, it's developed by Playground Games, it's an open world RPG, and I think it releases in 2020, which I think is really cool because I think one thing that Xbox absolutely needs more as a brand from a games perspective are more of these single player narrative focused experiences, and I think an open world RPG is a really good step in the right direction for them. So that one was quite safe, I think. So sticking with safe, I'm going to go now with number 4, that Cyberpunk 2077 will be at the conference, which I think is a no-brainer considering it was there last year, obviously, at the end. I think we'll get a release window for it, and that release window is going to be in the first half of 2020 sometime. I think people hoping for a 2019 release on this game are kind of dreaming, but at the same time, I do think it's not that far away. I'm holding out for a middle of 2020, maybe a May release date for the game in the end, just because that would mark exactly 5 years after The Witcher 3 was released. But as to what they show for Cyberpunk, I think we're going to get a much more extensive gameplay trailer, much like Microsoft did 1 year before The Witcher 3 came out in 2014. There was a brief gameplay demo for The Witcher 3 at that time. So, if you want to follow the pattern exactly, it would make sense for them to do a brief Cyberpunk 2077 gameplay demo with some CD Projekt Red devs up on stage this year. Alright, let's get more interesting. Number 5, I think there's going to be a From Software game, and that game is going to be the rumoured, I believe it's called Project Ruin, open world From Software game that's being co-developed, or I guess I should say kind of the story's been consulted with George R.R. Martin. I think the fact it's been heavily rumoured over the past few weeks indicates the announcement is imminent, and if it's going to be anywhere at E3, it's going to be at Microsoft's conference because Microsoft has a history of showing Dark Souls titles at these showcases, as well as obviously they showed Sekiro last year. They revealed that title at Microsoft's conference last year, so I think From Software's got a pretty clear established relationship with Microsoft when it comes to E3. This game's clearly on the horizon, and I think we get that full reveal trailer here. Okay, for number 6, we have to see Rocksteady's game, right? Right? It's been so long. Arkham Knight came out in 2015, and I feel like for the past 3 years, whenever these E3 conferences are coming around, everyone's talking like, yeah, Rocksteady have to be here because what the hell are they doing? Yet every single time thus far, without fail, they have not shown up. I think it has to be now or never. Rocksteady has to reveal at this conference what they've been working on, and I think it's probably going to have something to do with the DC Universe somehow. I don't think it'll be an Arkham game, but it'll have something to do with the DC Universe, maybe a Justice League kind of thing. Regardless, that's not the prediction. I think Rocksteady has to be at E3, and it has to be at Microsoft's conference, simply because there's no Sony for them to go to this year. Keeping in line with Warner Brothers published games, I think that we're also likely to get another DC reveal, and that is from WB Montreal, I believe the developers of Arkham Origins. It's been heavily rumoured that that studio's been working on another Batman game, or another kind of DC-based game, I guess. Which would make sense. I don't believe they've developed a game since 2013 when Arkham Origins came out, but I could be wrong on that one. But anyway, I think they also, much like Rocksteady, have to have something to show this E3 because it's been so long. But this time I'm going to go more specific. I think it will be a Batman game. Whether or not it's got Arkham in the title, I can't be sure, but I think it will be a new Batman game. And also a quick note alongside that, another Warner Brothers published game that was leaked months and months ago was that Harry Potter RPG that was being developed by Avalanche, and I do think there's a very, very good chance we see that here, but I do hesitate towards there being 3 Warner Brothers published games at this conference. So for that reason, I felt as though I had to take one of them out, so I chose Harry Potter just because I thought there was a possibility it was too early. For number 8, it's been 6 years at this point since we've seen a Bioshock game, and I think it's finally time to see another one. Whatever Bioshock 4 ends up being called, I assume it's going to have a brand new setting and new characters and the like. If it's going to show up anywhere at this E3, and I think that there's a very good chance it does, it has to be here. There's really no other place for 2K published games to show up, so it only makes sense for the next installment of Bioshock to be here, and I think that it's going to really be a highlight for the conference. Now number 9, I do think that Marvel's Avengers that Square Enix published and Crystal Dynamics developed Avengers game will be at Microsoft's conference, even though Square Enix is also doing their own presentation. The full blowout of this game would be huge for Microsoft's conference, and I think they know that, and the fact that this conference obviously goes before Square Enix's conference means that if it's here, it will be revealed first here, which is obviously huge. Now the reason I think it will be at this conference revealed and then shown in more detail at Square Enix's conference is actually pretty simple. There's a clear history of this happening in the past with Square Enix published games specifically, and even more specifically with Crystal Dynamics developed games, because for one example, just last year, Shadow of the Tomb Raider was shown at Microsoft's conference before it was again shown in more detail at Square Enix's conference. For some reason, Square Enix does this weird thing where they have their games show up at lots of conferences and then at their own later, and I think that's going to continue with Avengers. Alright, last but not least, let's talk about these new first-party studios for Microsoft. There were 5 acquisitions at E3 2018, and I think that we're absolutely going to see some stuff from these studios. Now, in regards to, I think, the most talked about and by far the most interesting studio, which is the one they created in Santa Monica, being The Initiative. That studio is made up of a lot of veterans of the industry, and I think there's a possibility that we get a teaser for their game. I think it's definitely too soon for a full reveal because the team was presumably only put together a year and a half ago or so, but it's possible we get some kind of teaser trailer for whatever their new IP might be. So while that's possible, I'm actually gonna say that that doesn't happen, because if the other predictions are any indication, and if all these third parties are any indication, Microsoft will already have an absolutely loaded conference, and I think showing a very brief teaser trailer for a new game that we've never seen before from an unestablished franchise, I think that that's not going to be all that exciting compared to some of the other stuff they're going to show. So I think they'd rather save that game for a future E3, perhaps next year, where they'll actually have something more substantial to say. I think most of the others are also too early. Obsidian's working on the Outer Worlds, so that's out of the question. Undead Labs only released State of Decay last year, so I don't think that's happening either. However, the one acquired studio that I think it's absolutely their time to come out swinging with an Xbox exclusive that's going to make people really excited is Ninja Theory, because it's been almost 2 years since Hellblade came out. So I think it's highly likely they are ready to show their next project in detail. And I think whatever that game ends up being is going to be a really, really awesome title for Microsoft's future lineup. Alright, there you go. There are my 10 main E3 predictions for Microsoft's conference. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's clearly now Xbox's time to shine with no Sony around. The field is clear for them, and I think that they're really going to make us happy this year. Their presentations overall have gotten much better over the past few years. We've seen them progressively get better and better. So with those natural improvements, along with the studio acquisitions, the next-gen talk, and of course the flocking of third parties to their conference, I think it's going to be huge. I'm stoked for the conference. As I said, please feel free to leave your predictions in the comments down below for Xbox's conference. If you enjoyed watching this video, maybe consider subscribing. I definitely appreciate it. But that's all from me. This has been SirCazz. Farewell.